2018 has been a really good year for movies. We've had some great dramas such as Blackkklansman, Searching, Isle of Dogs, 8th Grade, Leave No Trace, First Reformed, and Yorgos Lanthimos' new movie, The Favorite, which, unlike his previous films, isn't really weird, but is really good. Even Netflix, which used to be terrible when it came to original movies, has been having a great year for movies, with the fantastic Roma, the new Coen brothers film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and the Black Mirror feature film, Bandersnatch, whose interactive nature brings into question the definition of cinema. It's also been a fantastic year for horror and genre films, including a strong return to form for the Halloween franchise and movies such as Apostle, The Ritual, which were also Netflix originals, and films such as Hereditary, Ghost Stories, Annihilation and Upgrade, and a whole lot more, some of which I will be talking about shortly. Bottom line is 2018 has given us a lot of great movies to talk about, and there's probably a lot of hidden gems that won't even be on my radar for another 2 or 3 years. It's also been a great year for the type of movies that I cherish on this channel. Weird movies. And so this year I announced the first annual Woscar Awards. That is Weird Oscars. Woscars. It's a working title. Before I announce the winners, let's talk about the nominees. David Robert Mitchell's previous film, It Follows, was a really good movie. It had an interesting concept and ran with it, or more accurately, walked slowly in the background with it, and was quite effective. It's not my favorite horror movie, but it does its job, and I'd recommend it to every horror fan. Under the Silver Lake, however, is a different beast. The best way I could describe it is millennial blue velvet, and it is fantastic. It's a mystery filled with codes, ciphers, and dead ends, and it's the kind of mystery that never really gets solved. At least not completely. My favorite kind. In the movie, we follow Sam, a young man who lives in Hollywood. He meets a beautiful young blonde woman with an obsession for the film How to Marry a Millionaire, and he becomes quite smitten. When that girl goes missing the next day, he decides to focus all his efforts on uncovering the mysteries of Silver Lake and finding her, forgetting completely about trivial matters such as paying his rent. He actually does find out what happens to the girl, but there are so many other things that happen that are unsolved, indicating a much deeper rabbit hole. The main theme of the film seems to be about spending too much of one's time focusing on things that are not important. It's very critical of Hollywood and pop culture, especially during one interesting scene in which Sam meets a songwriter who claims to have written everything from Beethoven's Ode to Joy to the hits of Nirvana. In 2.5 hours, there's a lot going on, but it never gets boring and brings up a lot of things to think about. Did I mention it was weird? Because it is. It's pretty weird. It has women barking like dogs, a dog killer on the loose, a nude owl woman who kills people in their sleep, a hobo conspiracy, a middle-aged nudist with a parrot, and a band called Jesus and the Brides of Dracula, led by a guy who dresses as Jesus and takes very weird-looking shits. Speaking of movies which criticize pop culture, we have Mandy, which both criticizes and embraces niche pop culture. I am in the process of making a full-length video for this movie, so if you want to learn what I mean by that, look out for that video soon. For now, I will be very brief. Panos Cosmatos, who previously directed Beyond Black Rainbow, teams up with the one and only Nicolas Cage to create a truly unique viewing experience. It's a slow burn, heavy metal, and campy adventure that also manages to evoke emotions while entertaining with bloodshed courtesy of an LSD-fed Nicolas Cage. I have a lot to say about this movie, so be sure to check out my in-depth review in the future. At the time of writing this might be my favorite movie of the year. It's definitely my favorite horror movie of the year and may actually be one of the best horror movies in the past 30 years. I'm not kidding, it's that good. It feels like a classic lost horror movie from the 70s, and the fact that it's a debut feature makes it all that more impressive. Unfortunately, it won't be getting too many Woscar nominations because, other than the fact that it double downs on the supernatural and takes risks in the third act where other movies would have played it safe, it's not that weird. Ballsy and effective, but not really weird. There's been a trend in the movie critic world where a horror movie that is well liked by critics stops being called a horror movie, because I guess horror is a genre that carries a lot of stigma around it. So what you get is people saying that Get Out wasn't a horror movie or Hereditary wasn't a horror movie because they deal with complex themes and are therefore dramas. Hereditary deals with subjects such as mental illness, loss, and grief in a very mature way, but it is still a horror movie, and its third act cements that and wears the horror flag proud. Hereditary may deal with very real fears that one may encounter every day, but it also transforms and complements those fears in an in-depth occult mythology, and that's something to be admired. The other reason why I'm including it in my fake awards show is because it seems to be ignored by the real awards shows. It's such a fantastic movie with great performances and a great score. Toni Collette should really get a nomination for her performance. The score is also very memorable. If A Quiet Place could get a Golden Globe nomination for its score, which was arguably the worst part of that movie, then I have lost whatever little faith I had in award shows. Okay, rant over. Sorry to Bother You is a fantastic and hilarious anti-establishment satire from Boots Riley about a young man named Cassius Green who rises the social and economic ladder in a telemarketing company by using his white voice, which is overdubbed by David Cross. It's set in an alternate reality and does a good job of slowly building its world, bringing the weirdness scale up slowly throughout the movie until the balls to the walls third act twist where the absurdity and surrealism is really brought out. It's also a very good movie and an impressively coherent debut feature, especially considering how easily it would have been to go off the rails. It's very well cast and has a lot of interesting and flawed characters. While the movie's main target is against an oppressive and unfair capitalist society, it also isn't afraid to satirize the other side. Cassius Green's girlfriend, named Detroit, is a complex character in that she protests against the establishment but also has a moral superiority complex. She looks down on Cassius as he uses his white voice, however she also hides her identity and uses her own white voice in order to better sell her art, thereby embracing capitalism and being a part of the system that she is supposedly against. Even Stephen Yeun's character, who starts a protest, gives off the impression that he is only doing so because the image of being a rebel is cool. The movie is also very relatable. Despite being about a black person using their white voice to rise through society, the conflicts throughout the movie never seem to be minority specific, with the exception of the rap scene. The white voice isn't really about being white, but rather about being someone that you are not. It's about pretending that you don't have a care in the world when you do, and giving up your values for a shot at success. And that's something that most people can relate to. Bottom line, Sorry to Bother You is a great weird movie that gives you a lot to think about and is destined for cult classic status. Snowflake is a German action revenge comedy that feels like a blend between Charlie Kaufman's adaptation and the ultra-violent and stylized movies of Tarantino. Despite its many inspirations, it still feels like its own thing and has its own style and quirks, and is yet another impressive debut feature. Now that I mention it, I noticed that all of the films I've talked about from 2018 so far have been either directorial debuts or sophomore films. We've definitely got some new weird talents to look forward to. Anyways, back to Snowflake. The basic premise of the film involves two criminals in a future, slightly dystopian Berlin who find a script that details everything that they have done. It's a script to a movie called Snowflake. They track down the screenwriter and make him print the whole thing, but the problem is that the script isn't finished, and the screenwriter is a dentist who only writes as a hobby, and the end results in the two criminals dying. So the two criminal protagonists who were originally designed by the screenwriter to be antagonists demand a rewrite. The whole movie takes a number of bizarre turns, resulting in a very entertaining comedy that touches on the nature of free will and revenge, and even features God himself. It's a highly recommended and entertaining film, and I look forward to seeing what this director does next. There really is no film quite like November. At times it feels like a Tarkovsky or a Parajanov movie or even a Bergman film, yet it also has a strange dark sense of humor and is definitely one of the most unique films I've ever seen. I also think it might be the only Estonian movie I've ever seen. Essentially, November is a series of folk legends and fantasies brought to life. It's set in the 19th century where crazy superstitions are real. The devil lives in the forest and villagers go to him to bind souls into crafts so that they could do housework and other things for the villagers. If you don't know what a craft is and how it could do work for a villager, don't worry. The very first scene of the movie will demonstrate. That's probably the strangest bit of folklore in the movie, but there is a lot more that I won't spoil for you. There's a lot of side plots revolving around the villagers and the strange world that the movie takes place in, but the heart of the film is the universal story of young lovers. It's a film like no other that definitely deserves a second viewing from me, and possibly a full-length review. Lars von Trier returns to Cannes with another controversial and disturbing movie, featuring lots of deaths, including child death and mutilation, that also happens to be really funny. I mean, really, it might be my favorite comedy of the year, as long as you can see it as a comedy. And that might be very hard to do unless you are somewhat familiar with the works of von Trier. He's a very provocative director and has a number of hits and misses in his career, and not everyone agrees what those are. For half of his fans, this appears to have been a miss, but for the other half, including myself, it was a hit. The film centers on a serial killer named Jack, played by Matt Dillon. Through the course of the film, which takes place over 12 years, we see 5 of Jack's works of art, as he considers them. In between, we also hear him having a conversation with a man named Virgil about art, architecture, and the nature of Jack's killing. Sounds pretentious, right? That's because it is. Jack, the character, is pretentious, and so is von Trier. And in this movie, von Trier kind of admits to that. I interpret the film to be a satirical autobiography about von Trier himself and his struggles with his own intellect, ego, and the creation process for his movies. In the film, when Jack talks about art, we are treated to a montage of events of von Trier's previous works, a decision which many take to be extremely egotistical. Which it is, but at the same time, I think that was the point. Throughout the film, Jack struggles with OCD, meticulously cleaning the crime scenes, getting over it, becoming more ambitious, but throughout it all, harboring low self-esteem and insecurity about a house that he is trying to build. He eventually does build the house out of the bodies of his previous victims. If that doesn't describe the journey of an egotistical artist, I don't know what does. It's a really good movie with a raw feel to it, but I'd recommend it only if you can stomach extreme violence and maybe even find the humor in it, and already know who Lars von Trier is. If you want to get acquainted with von Trier, watch Antichrist.
Antichrist, Antichrist, Antichrist.
The Wild Boys is a weird fucking French movie that features a lot of prosthetic dicks and male to female transitions and makes me rather uncomfortable. So of course I loved it. In The Wild Boys, 5 upper class boys who I learned after watching the film are actually all portrayed by women, rape and accidentally murder their literary teacher, and are put on a very strange trial that appears to take place in space or maybe heaven. As they await judgment, their parents employ a man called the Captain, who claims he can tame the boys by taking them on a voyage on his ship, feeding them a strange, rotted, hairy fruit, and transforming them into trans females. Pretty weird premise, right? Did I mention that the boys also worship their own personal demon god named Trevor, and claim via inner monologue that Trevor made them rape and kill the teacher? That's not an excuse that they give the judge. That's what they actually believe happened. And possibly is what actually happened. Who's to know with a film like this? There's lots of phallic imagery in this one, including actual prosthetic phalluses and dism plants. Yep, it's a pretty weird movie, and it's quite good, but not quite as good as it should have or could have been, and is a tad bit pretentious. Based on weirdness alone, however, it definitely takes the cake for the movies of 2018. Oh, Nelly. I saw this movie 2 days ago at the time of writing this, and I'm still trying to process it. This is really a love it or hate it movie. There isn't really any middle ground. And I love it. I actually think it's a masterpiece, and maybe the only time in history that a masterpiece was remade into a masterpiece. When I first heard that remake of Suspiria was in the works, I was skeptical. I was especially skeptical after reading an article that noted it would not be using the unique and distinctive color palettes found in the original. I figured, what is the point in that? Surreal set design and color palette is what makes the original movie good. The plot of Argento's movie is very bare bones and really only serves as something to hang the visuals and dreamlike atmosphere on. With this movie, however, Luca Guadagnino uses the basic premise of an American girl going to a ballet school in Germany that is actually a witch coven, and expands on it in a way that differs drastically from the original, making them very different movies. While Argento uses surrealism, Guadagnino uses realism and the backdrop of a divided Berlin to create a character-driven drama about an equally divided Witch coven, and that is probably the biggest difference between the original and the remake. While Argento gives us a dreamlike horror, Guadagnino gives us a realistic drama that just so happens to be a horror movie about witches. This movie actually examines a power struggle occurring in the coven, in which Madame Blanc, played by Tilda Swinton, is pitted against Helena Marcos, also played by Tilda Swinton under a lot of makeup, who claims to be the mother of size, Suspiriorum, herself. There's a lot of subtext revolving around this matriarchal society and its relationship to the patriarchy. One subplot in the movie involves a male therapist, who is also played by Tilda motherfucking Swinton, who represents the inadequacy of the patriarchy as he attempts to save the girls from the coven, but fails. Interestingly, the witches need him to serve as a witness to their ritual, a possible allegory for the matriarchy being unable to function without the patriarchy. Anyways, there's lots of subtext going on in the background of this movie that I'm not even going to touch upon, including the politics. This movie might deserve a full-length review as well from me in the future. We'll see. In addition to the wonderful triple performance of Tilda Swinton, the girls do a great job too. Dakota Johnson, who is best known for being terrible in the 50 Shades of Grey movies, is actually pretty good here as Susie. She doesn't quite portray the wide-eyed innocence of Jessica Harper from the original, but given that this movie completely changes Susie's arc, it kind of makes sense that she wouldn't, and I probably would appreciate her performance more a second time. Mia Goth also gave a great understated performance. The film is a bit of a slow burn and maybe just a tad overlong at 2.5 hours, although I would never say that I was bored watching it. It also has an amazing payoff, unlike the original movie, which, similar to Waking Up From a Bad Dream, actually ends rather anticlimactically. The finale in Suspiria 2018, however, is completely over the top in comparison to what came before, and I love it. Fantastic movie. So, there you have it. Those are all the nominees. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be announcing the winners in a separate video that I will release closer to the actual Oscars. You can see the categories that these nominees are nominated in the description below. If you feel like it, you can let me know in the comments what you feel should win for each category, and I will take it into consideration. I apologize if this video wasn't as visually engaging as I usually try to make my videos. I kept the editing to a minimal, just resorting to still images and clips from the trailers, just because I wanted to get this video out around the time of the real Oscar nominations. Anyways, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked the video and are interested in seeing more content about weird movies. I hope you all have a very weird 2019. Bye.